I'm joined here by a fantastic individual, someone I feel like I've known for years. He's communicated to us through the television, been part of our weekly watching of our football. And this quote, 30,000 people holding their breath here as Del Piero prepares to take this free kick. Del Piero, that's what they came to see. That's why Sydney FC paid the money. That is a measure of a man. That was the 25th of September, 2014. I'm joined here by none other but Simon Hill. Welcome, Simon.
Good to see you, Sasha. How are you?
Yeah, fantastic. So, pretty surreal talking to you because I felt like you've talked to me for the last many years.
Talked at you for the last goodness knows how many years.
So, but first I'd like to know, how did you fall in love with our great game?
Well, quite simple, really. I didn't have much of a choice. My dad was and still is. He's 86 now, but he's a mad football fan, lifelong Manchester City supporter. And my granddad was the same. And my great-granddad actually played for Manchester City before they were even called Manchester City. They were known as Ardwick FC in 1892 when he played for the club. So this is a family thing. And as soon as I was old enough to understand what football was, that was it. My dad enrolled me as a junior blue. He whipped me down to Main Road and saw my first game in April 1974, which shows you how old I am, against Ipswich Town. And yeah, from that moment on, I was pretty much in love with the game. And obviously, my club, first of all. And it's been a lifelong love affair, and I'm still as much in love with it today as I ever was, really.
And so I take it in the schoolyard, on the street, and you play unstructured football with your mates?
Yeah. Every spare moment I had was spent kicking a ball around the backyard or in the local parks, playing for local junior clubs. And of course, like every other kids growing up, my ambition was to play and for Manchester City, of course, as well. But unfortunately, I knew at the age of 12 that wasn't going to be the reality, because I was actually playing for a junior club in Manchester, and City sent a scout down, not to watch me, I hasten to add, but just to have a look. And we were told by our coach at training during the week that this guy, whose name is Eric Malander, quite famous in spotting good young talent in Manchester, particularly for City. And he came down to watch us this one Sunday. And of course, I ran around like a madman trying to impress him, but he didn't look twice at me, unfortunately. He did sign our goalkeeper, a guy called Steve Crompton, who I'm still friends with to this day. And Steve played in the youth team for a few years, won the FA Youth Cup, in fact. And then sort of had a career in the lower leagues for a little while with Carlisle and with Stockport County, but didn't really make it with City. But he got a lot further than I did. So, even from that moment, even though that was a crushing disappointment for me at 12, I think even then, trying to figure out ways how I could be involved in football. And obviously, journalism was the next best thing, really.
Okay. And so what age did you play football?
Up until about 3 or 4 months ago, when unfortunately I tore my hamstring playing for in one of my many comebacks for the Abbotsford Juniors. So I think that's me done now. I'm 53, and the body, whilst the mind is willing, the body is not, unfortunately. So I think I've hung the boots up now. But I've sort of played, on and off all my life, really. Not to any great standard, but I love kicking a ball around. I still go down to the park and, juggle the ball and kick it around. It's again, a lifelong passion. But unfortunately, as you know, Sash, when we get older, the body just doesn't want to play.
I know exactly. So I'm brilliant in the mind as well. So it can't do what the mind wants it to do. So tell me how that transition happened from your love affair of football to being involved through sports journalism. What transpired?
Well, I went to university when I was 18, 19, to the University of Portsmouth on the south coast of England. And I didn't study a journalism degree. There was, in those days, no journalism degrees on offer, certainly not in the UK anyway. So I did an unrelated degree in social policy and administration. And then when I graduated in 1990, I spotted a training course for the National Council for the Training of Journalists called the Pre-Entry Course in Newspaper Journalism. And I wanted to write. That's always really been my passion, to write. Broadcasting came much later, but I applied for that course, had to go through quite a rigorous selection process, but was lucky enough to get on. So that was my sort of toehold into the world of journalism. And whilst I was at college in Portsmouth, I was offered the opportunity to write covering the Portsmouth youth team, doing match reports. Okay. So I got my first byline aged 22, 23 in the Portsmouth Evening News, which is still one of the proudest moments of my life. It was terrific. So yeah, that's how I started.
Great. And so you continued on you got gigs working at the BBC?
Yeah, my first job was actually for an independent radio station in South Wales. I looked for a lot of jobs in written journalism, but there weren't any at the time. There was a big recession in the UK in the early 90s, and there wasn't a lot of work in journalism in particular. So I applied for this job for a radio station called Red Dragon FM, which was as a commercial copywriter, basically writing adverts, which I thought, well, maybe that's the nearest I'm going to get in the current market. So I applied for that, didn't get it, but the radio station wrote back to me and said, look, we don't think you're quite suitable for that role, but we've got another job here that's just become available as a sports reporter if you're interested. So of course, that was what I wanted to do anyway. So I applied for that and got it. And my career took a little bit of a sideways turn, and I ended up working in radio, which I had no experience of. No real knowledge of, but my career path was sort of set in broadcasting from that moment on, rather than written journalism. And obviously, what has happened since, I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, so at what level were you commentating at football games? What are some of the games that you can tell me about?
Well, I started off, after I worked at Red Dragon for the first couple of years, then I moved up to BBC Radio Lancashire, which is a local radio station based in Blackburn. And I did my very first commentary in August 1993. Some commentators get dropped in, at the lower levels. Not me. I got Chelsea against Blackburn for my first ever commentary in the Premier League. So I don't remember too much about the game, but I remember that my producer said, you're going to be doing commentary. And I said, well, I've never done commentary before. And he said, well, let's find out if you can do it, shall we? So I've been doing it ever since. So I must have done all right. So I started, covering Premier League for that local radio station, continued on in local radio for about 3 years. And then I made the big move down to London, first of all with the World Service. And then from 1998, I did commentate matches at the African Cup of Nations and various other big events, but I didn't really become a regular week-by-week commentator until I moved across the floor, as they call it, at the BBC, and worked for the local radio broadcaster, BBC Radio 5 Live, which is the national broadcaster. So that's when I started doing Premier League games and Championship games and European games and internationals on occasion on a regular basis. So, I think probably the biggest game I ever did for Radio 5 Live was Manchester United against Liverpool, which was at Old Trafford back in the early 2000s, which, that was a huge game for me at the time.
Yeah.
And I did, the FA Cup final between the two teams as well in 96, and went to World Cups and did Club World Cups and all sorts of things. So I was pretty well experienced by the time I came to Australia.
Oh, fantastic. And so what would you say the major similarities or differences between sports broadcasting in the UK and what happens here in this country?
Well, the biggest differences really are the fact that clearly football is the number one passion in the UK. So the game is everywhere. And the budgets of the broadcasters reflect that because they're dealing with big audiences. Over here, we know that, football is not the number one game, and it struggles for money. And that's not to say that the broadcasts over here are substandard, anything but. I mean, for my 14 years at Fox, they invested an awful lot of money in the game and sent us to some weird and wonderful places doing internationals and major tournaments and Champions League and all sorts of things. So there's not a huge difference, but it's more that level of interest, I think, from the public. And that's obviously reflected in the depth and breadth of coverage and the money that is invested in the game. And clearly at the moment we're seeing that quite markedly because the game is in one of its regular dips.
Yeah. And so why Australia? I mean, so all the countries that you could have done this, what brought you from the UK?
Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted story, to be honest. And I just got to give you some context. So I actually left the BBC in 2001.
Yep.
I was approached by a new company, a new channel called the ITV Sport Channel, to go and work for them. So I did that in 2001. And unfortunately, by 2002, the business model wasn't very good. And that channel went bankrupt or went into administration. So I was made redundant along with an awful lot of other people. And I got lucky because a lot of those people didn't actually work in broadcasting ever again. I freelanced for about 6 months and I was actually offered a contract by Sky Sports in the UK in 2002. But around the same time, an old friend of mine called Rob Minchell, who these days lives up in Brisbane and works for the ABC, he was at SBS at the time, working for their radio network. And we'd stayed in touch down the years. And I'd actually come over here on holiday in 2002 to see him. And he said, look, they're looking for a commentator over here, SBS Television. I think you'd be perfect for it. And to be honest, I was a bit lukewarm. I was like, they don't know who I am. I've never really been to Australia. I don't know this scene. Why would they want me anyway? But he went on about it so much that in the end, almost to keep him quiet, to be honest, I said, look, okay, I'll send in a CV and a show reel. And I thought that will be that, to be honest. And to my amazement, in sort of late 2002, SBS got in touch with me and said, look, we're really interested. Would you be interested in coming over? So then I had a big decision to make because Sky had offered me this contract in the UK. But 12 months prior to that, before I joined ITV, I was actually offered a contract in Singapore, would you believe, to work for ESPN Star. And I turned that down to go to ITV. It had always been one of my life's ambitions to live overseas and experience something a little bit different. So I thought, if I don't do this now, I'll never do it, because I was 34 then. I wasn't married. I had no kids, still have no kids. So I thought, this might be your last chance to do this. So I turned down Sky Sports and I had a few sleepless nights, let me tell you about that, because they're, still the preeminent broadcaster in the UK, because I fancied doing something different. And I came over to join SBS in January 2003 on the back of all that. So, yeah, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So it's only 2 years later, and we've got a very, very big game. So we've got 2 games against Uruguay. So you've only been in the country for a few years. And
less than 2, yeah.
Yeah. So you're now sitting in the box, and we've gone 2 legs against Uruguay. We've probably got the better of the energy, but now it's down to penalties. And John Aloisi steps up. All the boys are arm in arm, and you say this. That means that if John Aloisi can score this goal, Australia will be there. Here's Aloisi for a place in the World Cup. He scores. Australia has done it. And in that moment, I still feel that those words and elation and the sense of joy as an Aussie. Because let me tell you this, that sense of joy was overcome because only 4 years earlier there were tears and many tears, because I'm 44, so we've had enough tears with the Socceroos. How do you come up with the right words to say? Do you just let it flow? Have you got any scripts or any planning? Describe to me that moment, if you can relive it for us, because we know then what John did. You know, he takes off the top, and he probably could have won the 400-meter 400-meter Olympic final. He sprinted that hard, and we knew what it meant. It meant, almost a quarter of a century of not being where we should be. We're going to be in the big stage again. But relive that moment for me, please.
Well, that moment was at the end of a very long few months, to be honest, for me, because as you might remember, I'd hosted the Ashes series in 2005 between England and Australia, quite out of the blue. And that had sort of catapulted my career onto the next level. And then all of a sudden, right on the back of that, I was thrown into this two-legged qualifier, Australia-Uruguay. And I'd been in Montevideo 4 days prior to that. So I was jet lagged and I was tired. And on top of all that, and the 90 minutes and the extra time and now penalties, I had a very, very emotional Craig Foster stood next to me, who had, as we call it in the TV industry, gone. Because he was just so invested in the outcome. So it's a very difficult night, that one. And you say, how'd you get the words out? Quite frankly, I'm not sure I did with any great alacrity. It was a difficult night. I had a line or two prepared because I think given the magnitude of the occasion, I wanted to be ready for every possible scenario. I had a line ready had Australia lost as well, which they could so easily have done. But in the maelstrom of, the emotion of the night and Schwartz's second save in particular, I had a moment where I went blank, and I've described this moment many times. I described the Schwarzer save, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw John Aloisi walking very purposefully up to the spot with all this noise, going on around him. And I thought to myself, what's the score? If he scores this one, isn't that it? And it was just I think it was a mixture of tiredness, emotion, the tension of the occasion. Fozzie was no help because he was gone. So I physically grabbed a guy called Nick Christou, who was our producer in the box on the night, working for SBS. Great guy, Nick. And as I said the words, I was literally holding him by the scruff of the neck, looking for confirmation that what I was saying was actually correct. So you can hear the hesitation in my voice as I say, so that means that if Australia score this goal, they'll be there, or something along those lines. And Nick, as I was saying this to him, was sort of nodding, and then he had this moment of blind panic because I'd thrust this huge responsibility on this poor lad's shoulders. And he did, a millisecond of mental arithmetic with his fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and gave me the thumbs up just in time. And I turned back and said, here's Aloisi for a place in the World Cup. So it was as near run a thing as that. And I could have so easily got it wrong, but thankfully I didn't. And I remember going home that night and thinking that was terrible. That call was awful from the both of us, because we were so, horribly invested in the outcome, as everybody was. But I think as it's turned out, because Australia won, the emotion and the erratic nature of the call has almost become iconic and synonymous with that moment and people's memories, particularly Craig's reactions, and that's great, because I'm delighted to have played whatever small part I could in such a fabulous memory for so many people. But it just goes to show you that as a broadcaster, you're constantly on that knife edge, and had it gone the other way, or had I not got the words out or said the wrong thing or done the maths incorrectly, or Nick had, then it might have been remembered very differently. But, this is the perils of broadcasting and the joys. You only get one shot at it. You got to get it right.
So what would you say are the sort of the memories that stick in your mind in the time that you've been here, part of Australian football?
Wow. I mean, there's so many. Obviously, that night in Sydney, excuse me. Obviously, the World Cup that followed. That's a particular highlight because, again, it was historic for Australia, and I had the pleasure, the privilege of, being able to call the nation's first ever goal at a World Cup finals, courtesy of Timmy Cahill, and then two more quickly in succession as well. And again, that was a real, roller coaster of emotion, that whole World Cup. So there's grand finals, there's Big Blues, derby games, Asian Champions League matches. There's trips to, wonderful parts of the world like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and Vietnam, and Asian Cups and, World Cups. I've been absolutely blessed for a guy from Northern England to come here and not just to be involved in that, but to be at the center of many of those moments that are so fondly remembered by football fans in Australia. So, I've been very lucky. And while I hope my career is not finished yet, if it was to end tomorrow, then really I could have no complaints because I've done everything I ever dreamed of and more besides. And a lot of that, and I should stress, I had a good career in the UK as well. I had some big moments there. But, from the Australian part of my career, I'm very grateful for this country having given me that opportunity.
So obviously we get to see the 2 hours of commentary, either side of the game. But probably I would say some of the best stories might be what happened outside of the game. Because footballs, I'm sure that's all you talk about. Your mates are footballers. And the people that you associate with and talk with are involved with the game, right? So the vast majority of your conversation. So what are some of the best stories that you can share that you've been involved in a party to that really stand out?
Again, there's millions of them. Most of them, I think, come away from the pitch because what happens on the pitch, people have seen that. They know what happened. It's the backstories. It's, the nights out before, the nights out afterwards, the press conferences, the little asides. Sometimes the stresses of broadcasting and getting stuff done in countries where the technology might not be great. I'll give you, a couple of examples. We went to Oman in 2009, myself, Andy Harper, Murray Shaw. We were with Fox Sports for a World Cup qualifier against Oman. And Murray, who was the exec producer in those days, had done all the work beforehand, set up all the broadcasting equipment and the satellite feeds and everything else with the local broadcasters, which you have to do. And they do the same when they come to Australia. And we arrived at the stadium in Oman and were shown into our commentary booth, and there were two bits of wire hanging out of the wall. And, Murray said, okay, where's the broadcast equipment?
Oh, no, none of that for you.
And of course, you got the language barrier as well. So they were saying, sorry, what, you want what? Broadcast equipment, we booked it. Oh, no, we never got that memo. So, we've had a few of those stories where, you have to cobble together equipment just to get the broadcast on. Of course, people at home aren't aware of that. And you're doing all this sometimes in 35, 40 degree heat. So you're sweating and, the team sheets don't arrive until 2 minutes before kickoff. So you've no idea who's in the starting 11 for the opposition. And so all this stuff is the things that the public don't see. I'll give you one more example, a very funny example, although it wasn't at the time. At the Asian Cup in 2007, myself and Robbie Slater, we did a marathon stint. We were covering two groups. One day we were in Malaysia, the next day we were in Thailand, then we were back to Malaysia, then we were back to Thailand, boom, 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 boom. And at the end of it all, of course, Australia finished second in the group, which nobody anticipated because had they won the group, they stayed in Bangkok, which is where we were booked through. So we had this almighty scramble to get visas because all of a sudden we had to go to Vietnam, go to Hanoi. So first of all, we couldn't get visas. Then we couldn't get flights. All the Aussie fans were in the same predicament. Eventually, we managed to get that sorted. When we got to Vietnam, we had to pay money to get into the country. I think the police took a little bit of a cut, And then on the first day, Murray sent us out and said, go and shoot a piece to camera, a two-way, as we call it, an interview between me and Robbie, and do it at in front of a nice landmark so we can actually show people back in Australia that we are where we say we are. Yes. So we went out in front of the Ho Chi Minh Mausoleum Mausoleum in Hanoi, which is one of the great cultural sites, and started our piece. And immediately the Vietnamese police moved in with their guns sort of twitching and saying, no, you can't film here. Why? We can't. No, can't. What about if we go around that? No, you got to move. They just didn't want us there, right? So we tried 2 or 3 different spots, and each time they tried to move us on. In the end, we sort of moved around a corner just ever so slightly out of view from the police, and started this 2-way. And we got about 2 minutes in, and I could see out of the corner of my eye this policeman coming around the corner, and his gun was cocked, let me tell you. And I literally just managed to say, thanks very much, Robbie. Don't forget, you'll see the game on Fox Sports Channel, whatever it was, live 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday. And as I said, the why of Wednesday, the policeman came into shot and literally, pushed the camera out of the way and started having a crack at us. Yeah. And, again, nobody at home knows that, but these are, terrific stories. And there are many more besides. We got shot at the World Cup in Brazil 2014 on a tour of a favela called Rocinha. We went to Lebanon in the middle of a civil war and had to take a diversion because Al-Qaeda operatives had allegedly laid a bomb on the street from the road from Beirut to Saida where the game was playing. It sounds horrendous, but when you look back on them, they're incredible experiences.
Yes.
And things that you would never, places you would never go to normally as a tourist, but we had all those wonderful life experiences. The football really at times was almost, incidental. But no, it was great. The whole lot of it was terrific.
And, so football becomes this backdrop, and obviously you're in, unusual and exciting places. But as I mentioned, you're associating with football people, and these people, when you spend time with people, you're talking about common interests, you're bound to become friends, right? So what are some of the better long-standing friendships that you form through your association with them?
Do you know, this is an interesting question. I've been asked this before. I tend not to have a lot of friends within football, and the reason for that is, I come from the UK where I'm not saying I don't have any friends in football, I do, but I would say that they're more professional acquaintances rather than close friends, because in the UK in particular, there was always that sense as a journalist of them and us. The players felt it, the players wanted it that way, and the journalists did too. Now, it's a little bit different in Australia because it's a smaller community, so people know each other very well. And I've got people who I really like within the game, a lot of them in Australia. Do I hang around with them and go out for a beer with them? Not too often, to be honest. I do have other interests outside of football. There's a lot of time for that, but I tend to quite like my private life to be private, and I don't really knock around, if that's the right word, with footballers. I think if you're living it 24/7, it can become very, very draining. And this game is, it is all consuming. It consumes an awful lot of my time, and I love it because of that. But I don't want it to be the only thing that's in my life. And I play in a band. I've got friends who aren't involved in football. Some of them aren't even interested in football, and sometimes that's quite nice.
Healthy. That's healthy. So I recently read an article that you wrote about people that entertained you.
In the A-League.
In the A-League.
Got a bit of stick for that.
Well, I mean, that's why we have opinions, right?
That's right. Correct.
And you went through and talked about each club and a player associated with them.
Yeah.
If you had to now pick 3 out of that list, I'm going to ask for a revised.
On the A-League list.
On that A-League list, who are the 3 that you can put hand on heart? They're the 3 people that have really entertained me.
Okay. Well, the first 2 are easy. For top 1 is Thomas Broich for me. Excuse me. In my opinion, he's the best player the A-League has seen in the A-League era. I just thought he was terrific, and I loved his personality as well. And again, he was sort of a man after my own heart in that he had interests outside of football. Football wasn't, he was very passionate about it, but it didn't define him 100%. So I liked Thomas. I liked his manner. I love the way he played the game, and on the field he delivered every week. So he was terrific. Secondly, completely different personality. Same team initially, Besart Berisha. I love Besart because he's the sort of player that you either love or you hate, sometimes in equal measure. But his passion, which is often like a volcano just waiting to erupt. And you see when he gets substituted, sometimes the eyes, when the eyes go, that Bess is in that zone. And again, he's a winner, still scoring goals at the age of, 34, 35 for Western United. Love watching Besart play because he plays right on the edge. And I think that's what you want from a player if that's your club. The third one, I think, I could probably name a few who I'd say are all in the same bracket for different reasons. I loved watching Del Piero because he was a genuine superstar. I love watching Diamante because he's just brilliant and he's got a wand of a left foot. Similarly, Milos Ninkovic, always got time on the ball, terrific. Marcos Flores, the same, during his days with Adelaide United in particular. So I think, a lot of those players that I named in that, most entertaining 11, I've enjoyed watching, but I would sort of pick out those two and then three or four more in the same bucket.
I see. So I think Besart's in his FIFA stats has got like one of the highest, he's an outlier when it comes to aggression. So the way I see where Besart plays, if I could use one word to define how he plays, it's that word, it's aggression. And you use the word to the edge. But for me, obviously it's controlled aggression. It's not in a nasty way, but he's really, he always wants to be pushing. He pushes his team. Even I saw in the last year him talking to his teammates, and you couldn't see what he was saying on camera, but you could feel the intensity. And he had the dressing room. Everybody,
absolutely.
Diamante was sitting there all there cool and relaxed, and Besart's dropping these ones, pointing the finger and obviously telling the boys, listen, we're going to get up for this and you're going to do the job. And, that was the sense that I got. And when he's on the pitch, he does the same thing.
There was a Melbourne derby I remember from a few years ago. Don't ask me which year it was, but they were playing City. This is when Besart was a victory, obviously. And I think they were trailing 2-0. And Besart just got to a point, I think it was only 35 minutes in the game, where he just started chasing around the field like a madman. You could tell that he'd lost his temper with this, that he wasn't just going to meekly accept that they were going to lose the derby. And by halftime, they were back to 2-1. And I think he scored the equaliser, maybe even the winner. I can't remember the final scoreline, but it was the greatest example in A-League terms for me of that sheer force of will that he had on the pitch, and he inspired not just the players around him, but the fans in the stand as well, because they could see it. And they lifted the intensity, and all of a sudden Victory were back in the game. That's the mark of a very good player and a very passionate player. And you're right, he used that aggression in the right sense in that particular game. Sometimes he went a little bit over the top, but not too often lately. He's a terrific player.
Yeah. And so fantastic. Obviously, if he's playing for you, I bag for the other side. So it's very easy for me to throw barbs over the wire.
You're a City fan, are you?
I am. I'm a City fan. So and it started off with heart. So I tend to barrack teams that I love barracking for the underdog. So now we're not going to be the underdog. Now we're going to dominate in the next few years. So
okay,
see how we go.
Let's see if you're right.
So the you touched on earlier about the footballing economy not being as big as other nations, and right now we find ourselves in a time where it's there are challenges, and as a commentator, you get to impartially, commentate on the status of the game. So what advice would you give? And, obviously you do this throughout your show, but if you had to surmise this now into a paragraph, what advice would you give to the administrators of the game now?
Might take a bit longer than a paragraph. I think it's just really, connect with the supporters and with that huge base that we have. But they know that. It's not for me to tell them. It's how you do it. And it's easier said than done. But I think that's the key to it all. I think for too long in this country, and the A-League has been very good in many aspects. I think it was what was needed at the time. But I think it's not evolved as quickly as it should have done. And I don't think it's understood the football culture of this country, which is basically from grassroots up. And the supporters need to be taken care of. They need to be valued. This is not Manchester United or Barcelona or Bayern Munich, where the fans are just going to turn up whatever. They have to be appreciated. And, there was a point in time about 4 or 5 years ago when I thought we were almost there, particularly when the Wanderers were at their peak and Victory were doing well. And those two sets of supporters in particular, there were others as well. Sydney FC, Brisbane Roar had the Den all firing, and the Red Army down in Adelaide, the Shed in Perth. I can name all the clubs. Those active supporter bases were really growing, and the atmosphere at games was great. And we killed it, stone dead, because the mainstream didn't like it and tried to find fault with it and label them all as hooligans and troublemakers and refuseniks and foreigners, the old shillers, wogs and pufters stuff. And instead of standing up to those people and saying, you're talking nonsense, there might be 1 or 2 troublemakers, and there were, but we'll sort them out. But don't you take pot shots at our game, because our crowds are the best in the country. And instead, we sided with the mainstream, or our leaders did anyway. And I don't think the game has, certainly at A-League level, I don't think the game has ever recovered from that. But those fans are still there.
Yeah.
They just need a reason to come back and to believe and to be engaged again. It's a multifaceted problem. It's not just about supporters. It's not just about grassroots. Of course, a lot of it is to do with money, but it's also to do with the structures of the league, bringing in a second division, promotion, relegation, making it feel like a football competition that football fans are familiar with. And they're not stupid. They can watch leagues from all around the world via their television. So they have choice these days. And with consumer choice comes a responsibility, I think, to give them at least some of what they want. And I don't think we've done that well enough over the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe that will happen with independence. I don't know. But I know at the moment we're starting from a long way back. And that both saddens me and angers me, because we've dropped a long way. And a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it has been our own fault.
So the point about active, it's like you get a 16, 18, 22-year-old who spends hours chanting for their team. And literally, those boys sit there, and some girls sit there chanting for hours before the game, in the pub, before, at the game, and then sometimes afterwards. You treat them well, before you know it, they're the 35-year-old with their kids at the game.
That's
and
right.
You instill that football culture. That's the reason why.
It's the tribalism.
It's the reason why Bayern Munich or, Borussia Dortmund has the yellow wall, because you've got those generations of those people sitting in the yellow wall.
Well, Sasha, we started off this conversation by you asking me, how did I get involved in football? And it was exactly that. It was because my dad had been going to Man City for years and years and years. And the reason he went for years and years is because his dad took him. And my granddad the same. It's that family heirloom that you pass down. Now, we're starting from a slightly different point here because our A-League clubs are new and our competition is new. But we were getting to that point. Those teenagers who were on the terraces creating that noise and that vibe were passionate about their club. Now, I hope we've not killed that off totally, but we've certainly damaged it. And, because of that, perhaps we're not going to get the next generation when they grow up and have kids to support our football clubs. And that's a tragedy. So we've got to address that, not tomorrow, not in 3 months or 6 months. We've got to do it now because, time is of the essence. And those supporters are still there. We see it when the big games come around, but we've lost traction and we've lost meaning for those supporters and we've lost the connection with the clubs. So we've got to work very, very hard to get that back. And I hope that's going to start in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, good. So you've got with a couple of mates with Spider and more. You've got a podcast and
we do. There it is. Jim Spider and so much more.
You talk about the events that happen. So how did that come about? So how did you decide to start this podcast?
Well, of course, for many years I appeared on the Fox Sports football podcast, but when Fox decided that they no longer wanted me at the end of June, I was left with a choice. So, obviously I'm now freelancing and working for various people, but also I wanted to start a podcast because I think one of the major issues with the game is that we have not had opinions in any great depth on a weekly basis, and the people in power have not been held to account as they should have been, and that's one of the reasons why the game has dropped away. News Corp has changed its attitude towards football. They're the major media partner of the game in this country. Virtually the entire back catalogue, if you like, of football journalists at News Corp have been either dismissed or left, or their contracts haven't been renewed. So who's writing about the game? Who's talking about the issues? Who's most crucially holding the people in positions of power to account? So that's one of the reasons I started the podcast. I knew Maury and Spider obviously very well. I called at many of their games with the Socceroos, and they were keen to do it as well because they're as frustrated as me with the state of the game. So we thought we'd give it a crack, and here we are, 23 episodes in. We're still going. We've built a loyal audience. It's not as big as we'd like it to be yet, and obviously it's difficult with Maury and Spider being over in Europe these days, and me still being here. But we're trying our best, and people seem to like it mostly.
Yeah, so I think it obviously the continuity of your voice, the familiarity of the boys. Obviously, they're part of the golden generation, well respected. And so they're played at the highest possible level, both of them. So both very serviceable for our country, and they've done us proud on numerous occasions. So their opinions, and obviously, as well as now gone on to coach, etc., and being involved at club level. So they understand the politics and the nuance of what happens within the game, right? So, brilliant. And you've also started other aspects of your business. I'm wearing one of your T-shirts, so I don't know if
I don't think that's one of mine, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's one of yours. So that I got from. So yeah, so tell us about your T-shirt business. What's going on there?
Well, I'm not sure I call it a business, but I did a little collaboration. Excuse me, the guy called Rob, who owns a T-shirt company called Strip Tees, double E. He actually got in touch with me a while ago. I posted something on Twitter with my notes from yeah. Well, I posted initially some match notes on Twitter from the Australia-Japan game at the World Cup in 2006, and Rob got in touch with me and said, that'll look good on a T-shirt. And I said, well, if you want to do it, I'm happy to do it. So we did that and gave the proceeds to the John Moriarty Foundation, which is a cause that I'm passionate about, Indigenous footballers. And then a little bit later, when I finished up at Fox, I thought, people seem to be interested in these notes, and a couple of people had quoted my commentary lines back to me. So I thought, well, why not put some of those, hopefully iconic lines on T-shirts and see if there's any interest. So Rob was all for it. So we picked about 9 or 10, and yeah, that I wouldn't say that I'm going to retire on the proceeds, but we made a little bit of money out of it, which is nice. So I'm just, to be honest, at the moment, I'm just exploring a lot of very different things and seeing what fits. Hopefully the t-shirts fit, and yeah, enjoying it. It's, you know, it's nice to have some variety after being, you know, stuck really with the one company for 14 years. I'm now free to do what I want, and it's great in many ways. And
so that sort of rounds out the discussion. So what learnings would you say that have transpired? You obviously, as a kid on the streets of Manchester, you know, wanting to play for your beloved city, and then obviously gravitating to sports journalism and calling, you know, your first game. How cool is that? I mean, I also break for Chelsea, so but calling your first.
They won as well, by the way.
Yeah, so
Chelsea.
There you go. And then, you know, moving to Australia and really being part of the fabric of what I would call the modern game, right?
Yeah.
So
well, that's nice to hear.
You know, you've obviously been at every major sporting event that Australian football has been involved with, particularly being with Fox. What would you say have been the major learnings for yourself? Obviously, you're not part with Fox anymore, but still, what do you take with you?
Oh, I think overall, it's just that football is the greatest game in the world. I mean, it's given me everything. Everything that I ever dreamed of, wanted, didn't think I would be able to achieve, football's given it to me. You know, from a kid from Northern England to travel the world, being able to call the game that I love, earn a living doing at it. Earning a living doing it.
Yeah.
And, you know, experiencing all those different cultures, meeting all those different people, all united by, you know, the same passion, which is football. So if I had my time all over again, I would do exactly the same thing. It's the greatest game in the world. And as I say, I hope I've got a few more years left doing it yet, but we'll see.
Well, I'm sure you have. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Simon Hill, I think, like I said, your voice, I mean, we're talking now and it resonates. You know, I feel like because I hear you commentate, I feel like I've already known you. So this has been
That's nice.
That's very easy. You've been part of our living rooms and watching the game we all love. So thank you for your contribution to Australian football.
Pleasure.
Today's been an absolute honour and a privilege, and we hope that you're there to call many more games and be involved in our great game.
I certainly hope so too. Thanks very much for having me, Sasha. That was very enjoyable. Thanks.